In this video of the Historic Ordnance series, we are going to be looking at a U.S. manufactured M86 PDM, or Pursuit Deterrent Munition. Now, there is not a ton of information out there on these, and there's two reasons for that. First off, the M86 is designated for use by only Special Operations Forces, in particular your high-end ones. Green Berets, Navy SEALs, and Delta Force, and other groups that are at that level that you've never heard of. I do not know if these have been exported to other countries, such as countries in NATO and South Korea, but I would not doubt it that they do have some of these in inventory, or at least something really similar. The second reason why there's not a lot of information out there is because this is a modified M74 atom mine, or area denial artillery munition. This is the primary US's FASCAM, or Family of Scatterable Mines, anti-personnel mine. Now, these things are loaded inside a particular model of the 155 millimeter artillery shell. And my understanding on how it works in that configuration, before the shell is fired, they get programmed somehow for the self-destruct time for the individual mines. It gets fired on target. Once it's over the target, the back of that shell splits away and it pulls the mines out behind it. And then as those mines are falling to the ground, they conduct their self-test and they start their arming procedures. Once they hit the ground, that is when the tripwires come shooting out of each individual mine, creating an instant minefield inside enemy territory. Now, some of the technicals on this. These entered service in 1989. A lot of websites will tell you 1977. No, that's the time frame when the M74 atom mine entered service as part of the Adams RAM system. These were not developed and accepted into inventory till 1989. The height of each individual mine is 3 inches from the bottom to the top of the arming strip. At its widest point on the back of the wedge, it is 3 inches. Weight is 1 1/4 pounds, of which only 3/4 of an ounce is the explosive filler, and the explosive filler is Comp A6. These only come in green with yellow markings. They are not produced in any other color. Now, my understanding on the history of these is it really goes back to the Vietnam War. For those of you that aren't aware of it, well, during Vietnam, you had groups that operated inside enemy territory. They operated in Vietnam, they operated in Laos, they operated in Cambodia, they operated up along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Groups such as LRPs, Long Range Reconnaissance Patrols, and Special Forces was out there with their little indigenous groups, such as Montagnards, fighting the communists. Well, when they were doing those operations, sometimes they got in a little bit of trouble and they had to escape and evade. And they were escaping and evading under fire. Now, in order to slow the enemy, they'd use primarily hand grenades. But if you want to put a few mines behind you to deter the enemy from following you further, the only stuff they had to use was M14 toe poppers and also M26 fragmentation grenades that had booby trap fuses attached to them with a bit of tripwire to string across the trails behind them. It takes time to put those mines and booby traps in. And if the enemy is immediately right behind you, they're outside hand grenade range, you're a little bit screwed. So, fast forward to the early 1980s. Those guys that did those operations behind enemy lines during the Vietnam War, they're now the full bird colonels. They're the generals. They're the command sergeant majors. And they're thinking about, gee, what are my troops going to do when the big one kicks off against the Soviet Union or Communist China? And they end up in that situation. We need to get them a mine that all they have to do is hit a button or pull a pin, toss it, and it emplaces itself right away to cut down on pursuit. So that a soldier doesn't have to spend as much time as we did setting up those mines and booby traps in the Nam. So in 1983, 1984, according to a report I came across, the U.S. Army contacted the manufacturer of the M74 atom mines. Told them what needed to be done. Manufacturer said, all right, we'll look into it. 1986, they came to them with their finished prototype. U.S. Army then tested it up until 1988. In 1989, it was accepted into inventory as the M86 PDM or Pursuit Deterrent Munition. Now, big difference between the M86 and the M74 is the M86 has this extra stuff on top here. See, when the M74 leaves its canister, when it's fired from a 155 millimeter artillery round, it arms as soon as it leaves the canister. Well, they had to modify them so that these things could be armed when the soldier wanted it to happen. So they added this extra stuff on top. And what this does is it keeps it from arming except when you want it to. And it's a pretty ingenious little system. Are there flaws? From what I was reading, apparently there is. There are quite a few flaws. The failure rates on these are abysmal, at least in my opinion. In normal operations, normal temperatures, nothing too extreme, nothing too cold, the failure rate can be as much as 20%. And that failure rate is when the self-destruct timer inside these does not detonate when it's supposed to. So then you have a piece of unexploded ordnance, or UXO, on the ground that's still alive. And if the self-destruct timer counts down, doesn't go off, these things are pretty much out there indefinitely. At least until the internal battery finally loses its charge, and who knows how long that's going to take. Another big problem they have with these is in cold weather. In cold weather during testing, they were talking around negative 25 degrees Fahrenheit and colder. If the munition is kept in that environment for any length of time, more than a few minutes, the failure rate jumps to 50 to 60%. That is not good. Now, these mines are issued 2 PDMs to a bandolier, and I found a picture of the bandolier. And there are 6 bandoliers per ammo can. So 12 mines per can when they are delivered. And the bandoliers are issued 1 per soldier. Now, to use the PDM, it's incredibly simple. You pull it out of the bandolier. You pull the safety clip, is what they call it here. You pull this out on the back here. Drop it. You then put your finger into the arming strap ring here. Put it in there. Jerk it up. Pull this lever off, and what it does is it pulls out a safety pin right here, This lever should fall away from the munition, and even if it doesn't, as long as it's clear from the top here all the way, this thing is starting its self-test and arming procedures. And after 25 to 60 seconds, the mine is armed and it continues with deploying tripwires. So you pull the safety clip, put your finger in on the arming strap ring, pull the arming strap off, throw the munition. 25 to 60 seconds later, it completes its self-test. It then fires out tripwires. This thing can fire out a maximum of 7 tripwires, 4 on top and then 3 on the bottom, which are located on each of the corners. But because of the way it'll land on the ground, typically it only fires out 3 to 4 tripwires on average. The length of the tripwires is around 20 feet. The self-destruct time on these munitions is preset at 4 hours. So at the end of that 4 hours, if the mine has not been set off, it's supposed to detonate and destroy itself. However, the high failure rate. So it can go wrong. And it can go wrong at least 1 out of every 5 mines to as much as 3 out of every 5 mines will not go off at the end of the self-destruct time. Now, how these go off is if anything snags the tripwire, it doesn't have to move it much. It just has to pull it just a little bit, a couple millimeters. That tells the electronics inside that its little antenna here has been touched, criteria is met, and the munition goes off. These things also have a built-in anti-handling device, so you can make it past the tripwires. You start touching the mine, move it just a little bit, a fraction of an inch, this thing is supposed to explode also. Nasty little bugger. And the way to tell if you come across these on the ground, if it was artillery delivered or delivered by special forces, you have a recon team running through the area, look at the ends here. If one of the ends has this type of bracket on it, it's an M86. If you do not see this type of bracket on here, it's flat on both ends, that's artillery delivered. And that's how to identify it. These mines cannot be recovered. If it makes it past its self-destruct time and it does not go off, what you have to do is kind of build, say, a little berm around it on 3 sides. Stack some sandbags or something. Don't actually touch the mine. Do not touch the tripwires either, so it's going to be kind of iffy how you get it in there, but you'll figure out a way. You will then place an explosive block near the mine without touching the tripwires or touching the mine itself, as close as possible, say within an inch. Pop that fuse igniter, walk away. When that explosive block goes off, it should set off the anti-handling device inside the mine here. And by having the sandbags on the other side from the munitions, say we have sandbags on this side, we put the explosive block over here. This goes off. If it doesn't set it off right away, it's just going to pop it into those sandbags, and then hopefully the munition will go off. Hopefully you won't be launching it across the field. There you go. The US M86 Pursuit Deterrent Munition. They've been around for 35 years, still in the inventory reportedly. Very high failure rate in my opinion, but it also fulfills a needed purpose in the special operations community. To slow enemy pursuit so that team can make it to the extraction point to get on the chopper or onto the boat or into the vehicle to get out of the AO as fast as possible. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essay ons.